The first thing that hit Sarah Jenkins wasn't the heat, but the sound. A low, throbbing roar that felt less like something you heard and more like something you felt in your teeth. It was the sound of a city's nightmare, the sound of a 100-year-old apartment complex on 4th and Elm being eaten alive. She shouldn't have been there. She was 12 hours deep into a brutal ER shift. Her feet ached, and her scrub smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee. All she'd wanted was to get home to her cat and a glass of cheap wine. But she'd taken the surface streets to avoid a highway jam. And there it was. She was a nurse. You don't just drive by. She'd parked her sedan 3 blocks away and jogged toward the triage perimeter, flashing her hospital ID to a rookie cop. "I'm ER," she'd said, not waiting for an answer. The paramedic in charge, a guy named Miguel she'd seen in the ambulance bay a dozen times, gave her a grateful nod. "Jenkins, thank God, we're swamped." For 20 minutes, she was back in the zone. The world shrank to her hands, a pen light, and a set of triage tags. "His airway is clear, cap refill is under 2, tag him green," she ordered a wide-eyed volunteer, pointing to a man coughing up soot. "This woman," Stridor, burns to the face, "she's red. Get her on a non-rebreather now." She was applying pressure to a lacerated scalp when the world changed. The groan. It was a sound of finality, of colossal weight giving up. It was the building itself, dying. The entire front facade, a 6-story wall of brick and century-old timber, peeled away from the structure in a horrifying slow-motion avalanche. A tsunami of brick, plaster, and steel beams crashed down onto the street, missing the main triage area by less than 50 yards. A unified scream went up from the crowd, the air filled with a dense, choking cloud of pulverized brick. "Everyone back! Perimeter back!" a voice bellowed through a bullhorn. Through the settling dust, Sarah saw him. A flash of yellow turnout gear, 30 feet inside the newly created hot zone, pinned beneath a massive concrete lintel that had once been the building's grand entrance. "Man down! We lost a man!" someone screamed. The man with the bullhorn, an incident commander with Captain Davies on his coat, stepped into the light. He was from a different station, one Sarah didn't recognize. He surveyed the unstable wreckage, the flames now roaring from the exposed floors above. He shook his head, his face grim. "Nobody goes in, nobody! It's a recovery, not a rescue. Pull the perimeter back!" His men hesitated, their faces agonized, but they obeyed. They were losing their brother. Sarah squinted into the dust. The firefighter was on his stomach, his helmet gone, his body half buried. He wasn't moving. Davies was right. It was a recovery. Then she saw it. A twitch, just a tiny movement of his gloved fingers in the rubble. Her blood went cold. "He's alive!" she screamed at Davies. Davies glared at her. "Ma'am, you need to clear the area." "He's alive. His hand moved. I'm going in." She took one step and a hand like a steel clamp seized her arm. She spun. It was a cop, his name tag reading Kincaid. He had a thick, condescending mustache and a clipboard. "Ma'am, you are not to move," he said, his voice a low, smug drawl. "This is a secured scene. You are interfering with a fire operation." "You don't understand. He's—" "I understand perfectly," Kincaid said, tightening his grip, his eyes glinting with petty authority. "You're hysterical. Now step back." Something inside Sarah snapped. The exhaustion, the frustration, the sight of that twitching hand. She saw the man gasp, a desperate, failing fight for air. She didn't have 30 seconds. "Get off me!" she yelled, and she shoved Kincaid hard. He stumbled back, his clipboard clattering to the pavement, his face a mask of disbelief. Sarah didn't look back. She ducked under the yellow tape and sprinted. The heat was a physical blow. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of ozone. Glass crunched under her running shoes. "I'm coming! Hang on!" she screamed. She reached him. He was young, rookie, stenciled on his borrowed helmet lying nearby. His name tag said Riley. His right leg was horrifically pinned by the lintel. He was conscious, but his eyes were wide with terror. He was making a horrifying, high-pitched gasping sound like a seal. His neck veins were bulging. Sarah didn't need a stethoscope. Tension pneumothorax. His lung had collapsed, and every breath was pushing air into his chest cavity, crushing his good lung and his heart. He was dying, right now. "I'm a nurse. I'm going to help you," she said. her voice dropping into the calm, authoritative tone of the ER. She had no tools, no decompression needle. Her eyes scanned the rubble. Rebar. A sharp, jagged piece of it, about 8 inches long. A discarded plastic water bottle, half melted. It was insane. It was his only chance. "This is going to hurt," she said. "Don't move." She grabbed the rebar. "Forgive me," she whispered, and with a precision born of 1,000 procedures, she located the second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. She drove the rebar into his chest. Riley screamed, a choked, wet sound, but Sarah didn't stop. She twisted it, creating a channel. A gout of pressurized, bloody air hissed out of the hole, a sound like a punctured tire. Riley's body convulsed, and then he took a deep, shuddering, real breath. Okay, she panted, her hands shaking. She grabbed the plastic bottle, bit the cap off, and jammed the bottle's opening over the rebar, creating a crude one-way valve. It wasn't sterile. It wasn't protocol. It was working. His leg, the turnout pants were shredded, and a river of bright red blood was pooling beneath him. Femoral artery. She ripped her own belt from the loops of her scrub pants. She cinched it high and tight around his thigh, grabbing a fallen piece of wood and twisting it until the belt bit deep. And the bleeding slowed to a dark ooze. A makeshift tourniquet. "We're going," she said. She grabbed him under the arms. "You have to help me. Push with your good leg. Push!" He was a dead weight of muscle and gear. She dragged him an inch at a time, her sneakers slipping on the dusty concrete. The building groaned again, and a shower of sparks and hot embers rained down. "Move, damn it!" she screamed, as much to herself as to him. She hauled him back across the 30 feet of no man's land, past Kincaid's dropped clipboard and over the yellow tape. The second she was clear, 2 paramedics and 4 firefighters, their faces pale with shock, swarmed her, grabbing the backboard. "Tension pneumo, field decompressed with rebar and a bottle valve," she gasped, the adrenaline turning her legs to jelly. "A femoral bleed, tourniquet applied at... She looked at her watch. 22:47. He's a GCS 10. Get him on high-flow O2 and 2 large-bore IVs, wide open. Miguel, the paramedic, just stared at her, then at the rebar, then at the now-breathing firefighter. Holy! Sarah collapsed against the side of a fire truck, her body covered in soot and Mark Riley's blood. She was finally breathing herself. "Ms. Jenkins." She looked up. Officer Kincaid was in her face. His mustache was twitching, and his eyes were chips of ice. "You are in a lot of trouble," he hissed, his voice low so only she could hear. "You assaulted a police officer. You contaminated a secured scene. You're lucky I don't cuff you right now." Nearby, Captain Davies was being briefed by one of his men. He looked over at Sarah, his gaze flat and cold. He didn't see a hero. He saw the civilian who had ignored his direct order, the woman who had sprinted into the building he had just declared a lost cause. He saw the person who had, in front of his entire crew, proven him wrong. He turned his back on her. The ambulance bay at St. Jude's was a controlled storm. Sarah rode in the ambulance, refusing to let go of the IV bag she was squeezing, giving a rapid-fire report to the incoming trauma team. The second the gurney hit the floor of Bay 1, she was sidelined, a sea of blue scrubs and white coats swallowing up firefighter Riley. She found herself standing by the nurse's station, trembling as the adrenaline crash hit her like a physical blow. Her hands were caked in dried blood and gray dust. She was a ghost at a feast. "Jenkins?" She turned. Dr. Eva Rostova, the ER's attending physician, was staring at her. Rostova was a small, fierce woman who missed nothing. "What the hell are you doing here? You're not on the schedule." "I was at the fire on Elm," Sarah said, her voice hoarse. "That's my patient." "Your patient?" Rostova's eyes narrowed. She'd just come from the trauma bay. "The firefighter? The one with the rebar?" "He had a tension pneumo. I had to." Rostova held up a hand, walked over to the monitor bank, and stared at Riley's vitals. She read the chart notes the resident was frantically typing. She looked at the chest x-ray that had just popped up, showing the rebar, the bottle, and a reinflated lung. She stood there for a full 10 seconds, motionless. Then she turned back to Sarah, her expression unreadable. "You did that? In the field? With that?" He was dying, Eva. I didn't have a choice. A slow smile spread across Rostova's face. My God, Jenkins, you saved his life. You know that, right? Another 60 seconds and he would have coded. That was cowboy as hell. And it was brilliant. A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled Sarah's knees washed over her. It was going to be okay. She did the right thing. Go clean up, Rostova said, clapping her on the shoulder. Go home. I'll buy you a drink tomorrow. A very, very expensive drink. Sarah nodded, a giddy laugh bubbling in her chest. She headed to the staff locker room, peeling off her ruined scrubs, scrubbing her hands and arms raw at the surgical sink. She felt light, exhausted, and more alive than she had in years. She was toweling off her hair when her phone buzzed. A text from the charge nurse. Mr. Henderson wants to see you. His office. Now. Sarah's stomach tightened. Mr. Henderson was not a doctor. He was the chief hospital administrator, a man who lived on the carpeted, silent 8th floor, a man who wore $3,000 suits and smelled of expensive, antiseptic cologne. He was a man who spoke exclusively in the language of budgets, metrics, and liability. A call to his office was never, ever good. She pulled on the spare set of scrubs she kept in her locker, clean but wrinkled, and took the elevator up. The 8th floor was quiet, all muted grays and abstract art. His secretary, a woman who looked like she'd been carved from ice, waved her in without a word. The office was vast. A floor-to-ceiling window overlooked the city. Mr. Henderson, a tall man with perfectly coiffed silver hair, was standing behind a desk of dark, gleaming wood. He was not alone. Seated in leather chairs in front of the desk were Captain Davies and Officer Kincaid. Kincaid gave her a slow, satisfied smile. Davies just stared at her. The trap was sprung. Ms. Jenkins, thank you for coming, Henderson said, his voice as smooth and cold as the glass in his window. Please sit. Sarah didn't. Mr. Henderson, what's this about? I need to get home. I'm afraid this couldn't wait. Henderson leaned against his desk, steepling his fingers. I've just been briefed by Captain Davies and Officer Kincaid on the incident at the fire this evening. An incident in which you were, I'm told, the primary instigator. Instigator? Sarah's blood, which had been cooling, began to boil. I saved a man's life. That is a matter of medical opinion, Henderson said, slicing the air with his hand. What I am concerned with are the facts. Fact, you were off duty, not acting as an agent of this hospital. Fact, you willfully ignored a direct order from a police officer and a fire captain. Fact, you physically assaulted said police officer in the commission of his duties. He grabbed me. Fact, Henderson's voice rose, cutting her off. You entered a hazardous, unsecured scene and exposing yourself and, by extension, this hospital, to catastrophic liability. And fact, you then performed a rogue, unsanctioned, and frankly barbaric procedure on a patient with unsanitized, non-protocol equipment. He let the words hang in the air. Sarah was stunned, her mouth open. He was dying. He had a tension pneumothorax. He was bleeding out. Ask Dr. Rostova, she'll tell you. I don't need to ask Dr. Rostova anything, Henderson said, his smile turning reptilian. What I have is a full report from Captain Davies stating that your interference delayed his team's organized rescue attempt, putting his other men at risk. And I have Officer Kincaid, who is prepared to file charges of assault. That's not what happened, Sarah pleaded, looking at Davies. You were leaving him. You said it's a recovery. You left him to die. Captain Davies's face flushed crimson. He stood up. My team had the situation under control, Mr. Henderson. We were moving to a secondary approach when she broke the perimeter. She was hysterical. She endangered everyone. She's lucky she's not dead. She's damn lucky she didn't kill that firefighter herself. It was a lie, a complete, self-serving, bald-faced lie. And you, Kincaid chimed in, leaning back in his chair, enjoying the show. She shoved me right in the chest, sir. Almost knocked me over, clearly unstable. I showed incredible restraint by not arresting her on the spot. Sarah looked from face to face. This wasn't an inquiry, Medeseri. It was an execution. They were closing ranks, the cop and the fire captain, to protect themselves. Davies, the coward who abandoned his man, and Kincaid, the bully who got shoved. And Henderson? Henderson was the cleaner. Ms. Jenkins, Henderson said, his voice now laced with synthetic pity. St. Jude's cannot have employees who are unstable. We cannot have employees who assault police officers and ignore fire command. We are a hospital, not a vigilante operation. Your actions were a gross violation of your contract, of your professional ethics, and of state law. What you did, he said, walking over to her, was commit assault and battery with a piece of rebar. The sheer staggering injustice of the statement stole her breath. The door to the office burst open. Dr. Rostova stood there, her face flushed. Mr. Henderson, what is this? I just heard. You can't be serious. Her field intervention is the only reason he's alive. The charts prove it. I was about to put her in for a commendation. Henderson turned to Rostova, his smile gone. Doctor, this is an administrative matter. It does not concern you. Your opinion on the medical outcome is noted, but it does not and will not outweigh the legal and professional violations that occurred. Your commendation is denied. Now, if you'll excuse us. Rostova looked at Henderson, then at the two uniformed men, then at Sarah. She saw the closed loop. She was a doctor, but he was the system. She hesitated, her jaw working, and then, defeated, she gave Sarah a look of profound apology and backed out of the room, closing the door softly. The betrayal, however small, stung more than anything. Now, Ms. Jenkins, Henderson continued as if uninterrupted, due to the severity of these reports and the pending legal action, you are suspended effective immediately pending a full investigation, which I assure you will be thorough. Suspended? Sarah whispered. You're suspending me? For saving his life? You are suspended for your reckless endangerment, your assault, and the unconscionable liability you have brought upon this institution. Surrender your ID badge and your locker key. He held out a perfectly manicured hand. Numbly, Sarah unclipped the ID from her scrub pocket. The plastic badge, with her smiling face and the words Sarah Jenkins, RN, BSN, felt impossibly heavy. She placed it in his palm. A security officer will escort you from the premises, Henderson said, turning back to his desk, dismissing her. We will be in touch. Sarah stood there for a moment, hollowed out. Kincaid was still smiling. Davies was staring at his shoes. A large, impassive security guard appeared at the door. Ma'am? Sarah turned and walked out. She walked past the Ice Queen secretary. She walked past the abstract art. The guard, a man she'd known for 5 years, wouldn't meet her eye. He walked her through the ER, past her colleagues, who were all staring, whispering, afraid to speak to her. She was a pariah. He walked her through the sliding glass doors of the ambulance bay, the same doors she had burst through with a dying man 2 hours earlier. He walked her to the edge of the hospital property. Have a good night, ma'am, he mumbled and walked away. Sarah stood on the sidewalk in her wrinkled, spare scrubs, her purse in one hand, her car keys in the other. It was 01:30. The city was quiet. She had saved a man's life, and in doing so, she had lost her own. Sleep was impossible. Sarah got home at 2 a.m., fed her cat, and then stood under a scalding shower for 30 minutes, trying to wash off the soot, the blood, and the humiliation. It didn't work. She sat on her couch, wrapped in a towel, as the sun began to stain the sky a sick, pale gray. And then the world she had tried to save turned on her. It started at 6:04 a.m. Her phone buzzed with a news alert from a local station. The headline, Rogue Nurse Interferes with Fire Rescue. Officer assaulted. She clicked the link. There was a photo of her, a terrible, grainy shot from the scene. She was covered in soot, her hair wild, her eyes wide with adrenaline. She looked unhinged. The story was a masterpiece of curated lies. Sources say the off-duty nurse, identified as Sarah Jenkins, ignored multiple HUD. Orders from Fire Command, the reporter read, shoving a police officer to the ground. He hadn't fallen, she thought numbly. He just stumbled. Before rushing into the unstable structure. Captain Davies of Station 12 stated that while he admires the impulse to help, Ms. Jenkins's reckless and hysterical actions delayed a coordinated rescue by several minutes, putting his own men in grave danger. There was a soundbite from Mr. Henderson filmed in his pristine office. St. Jude's has suspended Ms. Jenkins pending a full investigation. Our hospital cannot and will not condone vigilantism. Our hearts go out to the brave firefighter, and we pray his condition is not worsened by the unconventional methods used by a civilian. A civilian. They had stripped her of her profession. They were painting her as the villain and the firefighter as her victim. Sarah threw her phone across the couch. Hysterical, reckless, vigilante, civilian. The texts started rolling in, first from her friends, her colleagues. Sarah, WTF is this? Are you okay? That's not what happened, is it? Call me. She tried to call her closest friend, another ER nurse named Chloe. It went straight to voicemail. A minute later, a text from Chloe. Can't talk. Henderson called a mandatory all-staff ER meeting. They're reading us the riot act. They said anyone who talks to the media or you will be fired. I'm so sorry. It's insane. The walls were closing in. Henderson wasn't just suspending her, he was isolating her. He was salting the earth. She tried calling Dr. Rostova. Voicemail. She tried the main hospital line, asking to be patched through. I'm sorry, the hospital operator said, her voice suddenly cold. Dr. Rostova is in meetings all day. Okay. Can I get an update on firefighter Riley, the one from the fire? I'm sorry, that patient is not accepting calls or visitors at this time. But I'm the one who... I'm his nurse. I have a specific note here, ma'am. This patient is on a full privacy lock. No information, no visitors, no calls, on order of administration. Click. She was blocked. Henderson had locked down the one person who could prove she was right. At 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. She looked through the peephole, her heart hammered against her ribs. Officer Kincaid, he was in his full uniform and he was alone. She opened the door, her hand gripping the doorframe. Ms. Jenkins, he said, that awful, smug mustache twitching. He was enjoying this. This was his victory lap. I'm here to serve you this. He handed her a folded piece of paper. A summons. The City of Bhajki versus Sarah Jenkins. Charges: assault on a peace officer, resisting arrest, obstruction of governmental administration. Assault? Resisting arrest? You didn't even try to arrest me. My report says you were a flight risk, and I de-escalated by letting you go, Kincaid said, his eyes glittering. Should have just stayed behind the lines, sweetheart. Some people just have to learn the hard way. You're lying. You and Davies, you're both lying. He said, she said, he's a fire captain. I'm a 10-year veteran of the force, and you're... What are you again? Oh, right, a hysterical civilian. He tapped the summons against her hand. You're going to have a real fun time in front of the judge. We'll see how tough you are in a deposition. Have a wonderful day, ma'am. He tipped his hat, turned, and whistled a cheerful tune as he walked down the hallway. Sarah shut the door, her back sliding down it until she was sitting on the floor. Assault, obstruction. She could go to jail. She could lose her apartment. She was already losing her life. She spent the next few hours in a frantic, desperate haze. She called lawyers. The first two, specialized in medical malpractice, cut her off. I'm sorry, Ms. Jenkins, but you were off duty. This isn't a malpractice case. This is a criminal case. And frankly, with a cop and a fire captain as witnesses, it's not one we'd take. The third, a public defender's office, told her they couldn't assign her a lawyer until her arraignment. She went online. She tried to post her side of the story on the local news's Facebook page. Her comment was deleted within 5 minutes. She tried to post on her own page a desperate, rambling plea for someone to listen. It got a few likes from her aunt and a cousin, but was immediately drowned out by a flood of angry comments from strangers. You should be in jail. Let the professionals do their job. My uncle's a cop and you're a disgrace. Hashtag fire the nurse. Back the blue. Support our firefighters. They had even created hashtags. She was being digitally crucified. The narrative was set, and she was the villain. The hours dragged on. The silence in her apartment was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the clock and the occasional hateful buzz of her phone as another news story picked up the rogue nurse angle. She paced, she cried, she replayed the event over and over. Did I do the right thing? She saw the firefighter's face. The gasping, the bulging veins. Yes, she saw Kincaid's smug face, Davies's cold glare, Henderson's reptilian smile, and I'd do it again. The thought didn't comfort her, it terrified her, because it meant they were right. She was unstable. She was a vigilante. She couldn't follow the rules, even when the rules meant letting a man die. What did that make her? At 4 p.m., the final blow came, a call from an unknown number. Is this Sarah Jenkins? The voice was official, female, and utterly devoid of emotion. Yes. This is Ms. Albright from the State Board of Nursing. We have received a formal, high-priority complaint from St. Jude's Hospital, supplemented by reports from both the police and fire departments regarding your actions on the night of It's not true. They're lying. Ms. Jenkins, the complaint alleges gross negligence, practice outside your scope, reckless endangerment, and conduct unbecoming a registered nurse. An emergency hearing has been scheduled. Your license to practice nursing in this state is under review and will be summarily suspended pending that hearing. The phone slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. Her license. It wasn't just her job anymore. It was her career, her identity, everything she had worked for since she was a 19-year-old candy striper. Everything she was. Henderson hadn't just suspended her. He hadn't just had her arrested. He was trying to destroy her. He was taking away her entire future. She curled up on the couch, her cat jumping up to butt its head against her wet cheek. She was alone. She was labeled a criminal, a hysteric, and a fraud. She had 24 hours left before her license was suspended. The 48-hour mark since the fire was approaching, and she had been utterly and completely defeated. The ICU in St. Jude's was a place of hushed beeps and quiet efficiency. Mark "Rookie" Riley was in a deep, chemically induced sleep for the first 24 hours. His leg had been saved in a grueling 8-hour surgery. The makeshift chest tube had been replaced by a real one. He was alive. On the 47th hour, they lightened his sedation. He woke up to a world of blurry shapes and a dull, throbbing pain. The first face he saw was his. "Rookie, you with us, kid?" He blinked, his throat raw from the intubation tube that had just been removed. Captain Maria Sanchez of Engine 51 was sitting by his bed. She was not a big woman, but she seemed to fill the room. She had 25 years on the job and a face that looked like it had been carved from oak. She was his captain. His captain. "Cap," he croaked. "Right here, Mark. You're at St. Jude's. You're okay." The memories flooded back. The groan of the building, the crushing weight, the dust, the inability to breathe, the cop, the nurse. I... Easy, kid. Don't talk." "No," he rasped, grabbing her arm with a weak hand. He had to say it. The nurse. She saved me." Sanchez frowned. "The reports are confusing, Mark. They're saying she interfered." "No, Davies left me," Mark whispered, his eyes filling with tears of anger and memory. He called it, said, recovery. I heard him. I was alive. And he left me." Sanchez's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "The cop," Mark continued, "the cop tried to stop her. She pushed him. She had rebar. She stabbed me in the chest, and I could breathe." His fingers tightened on her arm. "Find her, Cap. They were yelling at her. The cop. He was going to arrest her. Find the nurse." Captain Sanchez sat there, the pieces clicking into place. The official report from Davies, Station 12. The police report from Kincaid, The hospital's statement. It was all a lie. A coordinated bureaucratic lie to cover a coward's call and a bully's bruised ego. They were crucifying the civilian who had done their job. She squeezed Mark's hand. "You rest, rookie. I'll handle this." She walked out of the ICU, her boots silent on the linoleum. She didn't head for the exit. She headed for the ER. Dr. Rostova was in the middle of suturing a chin when Sanchez appeared at her elbow. "Doctor, I'm Captain Sanchez, Engine 51. Mark Riley's CO. I need to talk to you about Sarah Jenkins." Rostova's hands faltered for a half second. I'm not supposed to." "I just came from Riley's room," Sanchez said, her voice low and hard. "He's awake. He told me everything. He told me Davies left him to die. He told me Jenkins saved his life." Rostova finished the suture, her face pale. "Meet me in the stairwell, 5 minutes." In the concrete echo of the stairwell, Rostova's professionalism cracked. "They're destroying her," she whispered, her voice shaking with rage. "Henderson has threatened to fire anyone who speaks to her. He's had her arrested. He's going after her license. All because Davies and that prick Kincaid felt disrespected. And Henderson is terrified she's a liability." "I need proof," Sanchez said. "Proof? The kid is alive, that's the proof." "I need paper. The DA's office is friends with the police union. Kincaid's report is king unless I can shred it. I need medical proof that what she did was a rescue, not an assault." Rostova made a decision. She had worked 20 years to get to her position. She could lose it all. "Wait here." She was back in 2 minutes. She handed Sanchez a thick file. "These are Mark Riley's admission charts, my attending note, the x-rays, the surgical consult. It all proves it. Field intervention by RN Jenkins saved this patient's life. It proves the tension pneumothorax. It proves the femoral bleed. It's everything you need." "He'll fire you," Sanchez said, taking the file. "Let him try," Rostova spat. "I became a doctor to save lives, not to kiss a suit's ass. Now go. And you didn't get this from me." Sanchez returned to the firehouse of Engine 51. It was shift change. The entire A and B shift was there, a grim-faced family of 30 men and women. They were all waiting. They had heard the news reports, they knew their brother Rookie was in the hospital, and they knew a nurse was being blamed. Sanchez stood in the middle of the apparatus bay, the massive red engine gleaming behind her. She held up the file. "You've all seen the news," she said, her voice echoing in the huge room. "It's garbage, all of it." She laid it out. The truth. How Davies had abandoned Mark. How Kincaid had tried to stop Sarah. How Sarah had improvised a chest tube with a piece of rebar and a water bottle in a collapsing building and saved his life. And how, for the last 47 hours, Henderson, Davies, and Kincaid had been systematically trying to ruin her life to cover their own asses. A low, dangerous growl rose from the assembled firefighters. This wasn't just an injustice. It was a professional insult. It was a family insult. "Rookie is alive," Sanchez said, because a nurse in scrubs had more courage than a captain in a turnout coat. "What are we going to do, Cap?" One of them, a veteran named Grizz, asked, his jaw set. "Davies and Henderson have called a press conference," Sanchez said, a slow, cold smile spreading across her face. "It's in 1 hour, at the hospital, exactly 48 hours after the fire. They're going to publicly fire her. They're going to announce the charges. They're going to cement their story." She looked around at the faces of her crew. "So," she said, "I think we should go too." She pointed to the formal dress uniforms, hanging pristine in their lockers. "Class A's, everyone. We're going to a press conference." The front steps of St. Jude's Hospital were a media circus. At precisely 10 a.m., 48 hours after the fire, Mr. Henderson stepped up to a podium that had been set up on the sidewalk. Captain Davies stood just behind him to his right, looking solemn and important. Officer Kincaid, invited as a show of interdepartmental solidarity, stood to his left, arms crossed, trying to look imposing. A bank of microphones was pointed at them. At least 5 news vans were parked on the street. Mr. Henderson tapped the microphone, his face a perfect mask of concerned authority. "Good morning. We've called this conference to provide a final, clear update on the unfortunate incident that occurred 2 nights ago." At the back of the media crowd, standing half hidden behind a news van, was Sarah Jenkins. She had come. She didn't know why. Maybe it was to see the faces of the men who were destroying her. Maybe it was a desperate, foolish hope that she could run up and scream the truth into the microphones. She was tired. She was scared. Her license would be suspended in a matter of hours. She felt, a dead woman walking. She just wanted to witness her own execution. While we are all profoundly grateful that firefighter Riley is making a miraculous recovery, Henderson was saying, his voice dripping with synthetic sincerity, we must also address the actions of Ms. Sarah Jenkins. Sarah flinched at the sound of her own name. While we respect the impulse to help, Henderson continued, Ms. Jenkins' reckless and frankly unstable actions not only endangered herself, but also, he was cut off. A sound, so loud it shook the windows of the hospital, blasted through the air. Not a siren. An air horn. A deep, deafening, earth-shaking rig horn. Every head snapped toward the street. A wall of red was approaching. Engine 51, lights flashing, pulled up and blocked the main entrance to the hospital. Right behind it, ladder 51, its massive aerial ladder glinting, pulled up and blocked the other lane. Behind that, the battalion chief's black SUV stopped, blocking the street entirely. It was a show of force. It was a parade. It was a silent, beautiful declaration of war. Henderson stopped, his mouth open. Davies's face went from professional pink to a sickly pale white. Kincaid unfolded his arms, a look of confusion and anger on his face. The doors of the trucks opened, but the firefighters who eyed the thugs stepped out weren't in turnout gear. They were in their Class A dress uniforms, immaculate navy blue double-breasted jackets, white gloves, peaked caps, polished brass. Captain Maria Sanchez stepped off the engine first. Behind her entire 20-person on-duty crew. They formed up, 2 by 2, a perfect column on the sidewalk. "What is the meaning of this?" Henderson sputtered into the mic. "This is a private—" Captain Sanchez ignored him. The media, smelling blood, went wild. Cameras swung from Henderson to the firefighters, who now stood in perfect, silent formation. "Captain Sanchez!" a reporter shouted. "Look, what is this? Is this a protest?" Sanchez held up a white-gloved hand, and the crew began to move. In a slow, measured, ceremonial march, they walked past the news vans. They walked past the stunned reporters. They walked right up to the podium. Henderson, Davies, and Kincaid shrank back. The column of blue walked past them, as if they were nothing more than street furniture. They didn't stop. They marched straight through the crowd, which parted like the Red Sea until they reached the back, where Sarah stood frozen, her hand over her mouth. The column stopped. Captain Sanchez halted directly in front of Sarah. The entire media mob spun around, cameras rolling, microphones thrust forward, capturing the scene. Sanchez, her face strong and her eyes clear, looked Sarah Jenkins up and down. The rumpled hoodie, the terrified eyes, the face of the woman who had saved her firefighter. "Ms. Sarah Jenkins," Sanchez's voice boomed, clear and steady, needing no microphone. Henderson and Davies were completely forgotten. This was the only show in town. "On behalf of Engine 51, the entire fire department, and a grateful city," Sanchez declared, "thank you for saving our brother's life." Sarah's knees gave out. She sobbed, a raw, ragged sound of 48 hours of terror and despair leaving her body. Captain Sanchez didn't move. She raised her white-gloved hand to the brim of her cap in a slow, formal, perfect salute. "Detail," she commanded. Behind her, 20 firefighters in perfect unison snapped their hands to their brows. 20 salutes, held rigid. A silent, profound, and undeniable statement. They weren't saluting a hysterical civilian. They weren't saluting a rogue vigilante. They were saluting one of their own. "She is with us." The flashing of cameras was the only sound for a full 5 seconds. Henderson was speechless. Davies looked like he was going to be sick right there on the hospital steps. Kincaid was staring at the ground, his face a mask of thunder. The narrative they had so carefully built had just been blown to pieces by a wall of red trucks and a single, unified salute. The 48-hour war was over. The next day's front page was not what Henderson had planned. The headline above a powerful full-color photo of 20 firefighters saluting a weeping nurse read, "Hero nurse honored by FD, hospital, PD, and hot water." The story was brutal. It contained excerpts from Dr. Rostova's leaked charts proving Sarah's actions were life-saving. It had a scathing quote from the Firefighters Union president, who called Captain Davies's report a cowardly fiction and demanded his immediate resignation. It even had a statement from the district attorney's office, released late the previous night, stating, "After a review of new evidence, all charges against Ms. Sarah Jenkins have been summarily dropped." The fallout was swift, and it was total. Mr. Henderson was called into an emergency meeting of the St. Jude's Hospital Board. He was fired by noon. His mishandling of the situation had become the worst public relations disaster in the hospital's history. He was escorted from his 8th-floor office by the same security guard who had walked Sarah out. This time, he was carrying a cardboard box. Captain Davies was demoted. He wasn't fired, the union protected him from that, but he was reassigned to a supply depot in the furthest, coldest corner of the city, a place firefighters called the ice station. He would spend the rest of his career counting hoses and ordering new boots, his command career over. Officer Kincaid was buried by an avalanche of internal complaints. The DA's office, furious at having been made to look like fools, had a long talk with his precinct captain. Kincaid was assigned to permanent desk duty, processing evidence tags and filing paperwork in a windowless room in the station's basement. His days of a power trip on the street were over. 1 month later, Sarah Jenkins walked through the automatic doors of the St. Jude's ER. Her suspension had been lifted, her record expunged, and she had received a personal, groveling apology from the new hospital administrator. Dr. Rostova had met her at the door with a fierce hug. Her colleagues had thrown her a small party in the break room. It was, for the first time in a long time, a normal day. She was in the middle of triaging a sprained ankle when a shadow fell over her desk. "Excuse me, Nurse Jenkins?" She looked up. Captain Maria Sanchez was standing there, smiling. Beside her, in a wheelchair, looking pale but grinning, was Mark Rookie Riley. "Mark!" Sarah jumped up, rushing around the desk. You look amazing." "Feel a lot better than I did," he said, his voice still a little rough. "They say I'll be back on the truck in 6 months. Thanks to you." I'm just glad you're okay," Sarah said, her eyes welling up. We wanted to give you this," Sanchez said. She handed Sarah a simple, polished wooden plaque. Sarah took it. There was a small brass plate on the front. It didn't have a long, flowery speech. It just had 5 words engraved deep. "Honorary member, Engine 51. You run in when we can't." Sarah held the plaque to her chest, a tear tracing a path down her cheek. I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Sanchez said, clapping her on the shoulder. "Just keep doing what you do. We've got your back." Later that night, at the end of her shift, Sarah went to her locker. She took down the small mirror she kept inside, and in its place hung the plaque. She looked at it for a long time, at the reflection of her own tired, smiling eyes in the polished brass. She was just a nurse, but she was Engine 51's nurse, and she was finally wholly okay.